So in 2008, we started with the profiling of these offenders and also their modus operandi. We also gave them the choice to tell us what is the best deterrence factors, and they couldn't come up with one single factor that would actually stop somebody from breaking into a house or rob a specific house. The biggest issue seems to be inside information. 77% of the cases that they participated in, they had received inside information that there was very valuable stuff inside the house. And they said if it is so valuable and it's even a police station, they will still break into it. So it's to make sure that they don't get access to the information. The physical security plays a much smaller role. It's more important of where the house is situated in a neighborhood. Studies have shown it's at the end of a one-way street. Typically, they would rather break in there. They can actually see a police vehicle from a distance approaching the house. Houses in the middle of a block seem to be a higher risk. Near corners of a street block, they say they don't know whether they're going to be surprised by somebody coming around the block, or they're getting over the fence. So the location of the premises is more important, and then they get to the fences, the security at the house, and so on. It doesn't matter what fence you have, they would be able to get through it. And I haven't ever seen a fence that could not be breached. So fences are not there to keep them out. Fences are there to give you time as the person inside the house to respond if somebody is intruding into your yard. But then you must have a system where if somebody would get over the fence, it would sound an alarm, it would alert you. What we find, unfortunately, with the interviews also, that these offenders told us if you look at the security estates, it's an easier target for them because they've learned through experience. People inside the security estate rely so much on the fence, they let down their guard inside. They do not arm systems and so on. So it's an easier target for them. And I think it tells the whole story about over-relying on a fence. You need to be careful of that. I think people expose themselves to a great extent because they think the fence is going to keep them safe, which is not. So if they've got inside information that something is valuable inside, they would get into, irrespective of the height of the wall. And some of them told us during the interviews it actually makes it easier for them. Once they're inside the yard, they've got much more time. Nobody can see them. It's much more difficult for the security officer who would respond to an alarm to get into the yard themselves. Typically, they would not get over a wall like that. So it buys them actually time inside. Well, electric fences should be switched on. What I found in practice, if you go to premises, you would find some flower plant against the fence itself. It would short circuit. So you need to maintain it to keep it, preventing it from short circuit. What they told us during the interviews as well, the offenders, they would deliberately let the sound, the alarm, they would trigger it, sit back, watch for the third or fourth time the person would come out and watch, try and determine what is wrong. And then the person would typically switch off the alarm system, the electric fence, because it's malfunctioning. And then it's easy for them to get into the premises. And I've seen physically how they are able to get through these fences. Remember, electrical fences in South Africa, to be legal, they must not be lethal. So even if a child would touch the fence, you would get a shock, high voltage, low amps on the fence. So if you want to endure, you can actually climb through the fence. It's possible to do that. But they also isolate the fences. I've seen how they use sticks and pieces of wood and even just a thick coat they would put on and just climb through the fence. If you've got an alarm system, it must be effective, meaning it must only go off when somebody is actually in your yard. You also find that some security systems are so sensitive, it continuously triggers. So people end up not paying attention to it anymore. Even the neighbors would not pay attention to it. So you need to be careful of what security system you have, what it will react to. But sound, obviously, is the biggest deterrent for any criminal in the premises. CCTV cameras, it plays a more important role, a bigger role in managing after the crime incident took place. We didn't find it to be a deterrence value. What we found with studies that were done in the CBD areas of some of our major cities, where they put up the CCTV cameras, the crime just moved outside of the lens of where the cameras were. So they quickly learned where the cameras were. What it usually helps if there's an incident and you wanted to manage your response units and to send them to specific places and be able to tell them they've left through the street or they're running down that street, then the CCTV cameras seem to have a bigger value. If you look at burglary, the presence of dogs and so on would not play such a big role. The easy access to the yard, the pressing of a bell typically to see whether somebody's at home, those are the issues they would consider. But with house robbery, it's different. They look for different factors. They would use a different style, and for them, the presence of smaller dogs being kept inside the house was a bigger deterrence than anything else. They explained it saying that they time their crimes to take place when people are awake inside the house in the morning, 5 to 7, in the afternoon, 5 to 11. People haven't switched on the alarm system as yet. So there's nothing that can be a pre-warning system. And there the dog inside the house would then alert the owner to somebody that's an intruder outside. The dogs must be kept inside. If the dog is kept outside of the house, they would be able to scare off the dog. They use muti, which they believe would scare off the dog. They would poison the dogs also. So for them, it's important that you need to then keep the dogs inside. More than one dog. They say the smaller dogs seem to be more effective because they would make much more noise. Their biggest fear factor is the fact that something's going to make noise, attract attention of the people inside the house or the neighbors. So noise is the issue for them, even with an alarm system. I interviewed one of the offenders who was a drug pusher, but he was also addicted to drugs. And he said he had committed more than 1,000 house robberies, or rather burglaries, that he could remember. What they did on a daily basis, he and a group of friends would go into neighborhoods. They would target 3 or 4 or 5 houses per day. And they would typically move up to a house, irrespective of whether the alarm would go off or not. And they would look for sliding doors, because they could lift the sliding door out of the rails, get into the house, leave. And they say they knew if they could do it within 10 minutes, nobody's going to catch them. And this is what they did. And they did 4 or 5 houses per day like this. Well, for me, after doing all of the research, I think the key is most probably in getting involved in your community. Doing something that would make your neighborhood safe. If you're successful in that, 68% deterrence value, they would then go and find another neighborhood which is an easier target. So it says a lot about community policing forums. It says a lot about participating in community safety networks, which is something different. Community policing forums have become politicized to a great extent. Community safety networks is where people just work together and make themselves safe. Those are the factors that I think are more successful in preventing crime. And this is not unique to South Africa. It's also across the world. You would see typically where organized society is a better deterrence factor than anything else.